Assistance Council is a national nonprofit that supports affordable housing efforts throughout rural America. Since 1971, HAC has provided below-market financing for affordable housing and community development, technical assistance and training, research and information, and policy formulation to enable solutions for rural communities. Thank you for joining the webinar. Today is part 2 of a 3-part series on subdivision development. Developing subdivisions is a complex undertaking that requires both a vision of what's possible and an eye for detail throughout the entire process. In today's 60-minute webinar, from project inception through land acquisition, we'll walk you through the steps required to develop a successful subdivision. Topics will include formulating your development plan, assembling the sources and uses budget, managing the development team, and more. And don't forget to join us for a webinar after show, where a speaker will have an in-depth conversation on the sample bid document. Thank you to USDA Rural Development and the Rural Capacity Development Initiative for sponsoring today's event. Today's speaker is Earl Pfeiffer. Earl served as the Executive Director of Florida Home Partnership from 1997 until his retirement in 2018. He has a vision that each home should be built not to look like affordable housing, but indistinguishable from market rate homes. Earl's background is in apparel professional engineering, having worked as a field manager for several large civil projects, including subdivision development, water and wastewater treatment plants. He's a third-generation home builder and has worked over 35 years in the construction industry. Earl's involved in community development, planning, and management, and he has developed 10 subdivisions with a total of 1,000 plus lots, in addition to an 80-unit townhouse development in Plant City. Earl serves on the National Rural Housing Coalition Board and has served as Vice President of the National Rural Self-Help Housing Association. He also works as a consultant for the Housing Assistance Council, and he owns and operates Colorado Mountain Land Office, a real estate brokerage in Colorado. Now I'd like to hand the webinar over to today's speaker, Earl Pfeiffer, and our moderator, Vicki Stratton, Housing Specialist, Housing Assistance Council.
Hello, welcome everyone today. I'm Vicki Stratton, Housing Specialist with HAC, and welcome to the second part of a 3-part series on subdivision development. We were on the first webinar 2 weeks ago. Put a 1 in the chat. Look for your chat across the top. So just put a 1 in the chat and put a 2 if you were not here 2 weeks ago. Now I will let Earl take over to start today's webinar.
Thank you, Vicki. That helps me get an idea of how to present today. In the last session, we covered some things, and for those who didn't cover them, I'm going to cover them a little bit today, but we got a lot of material, and I want to just keep moving forward here. I've got to figure out what I'm doing here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So this is, as Vicki said, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. We're taking subdivision concept through land acquisition in the closing today, or in the subject today. I will have a optional 30-minute session at the back of this session to go over a land development bid document package that we have supplied, or we will be supplying, and then we'll also have time for question and answers. And then our next session is on 2 weeks from today, on May 25th, where we will cover the land acquisition through the construction and completion of the development. Actually, the introduction said I had 35 years of experience. I did the math recently and found out it's actually 44 years. I've developed over 1,000 lots. So I've been doing this a little bit a while, and I'm excited to be able to share what I've learned in the process. There's 2 essential different types of developments that we'll be discussing, or that are available. One is a private development, which is a development that has private streets, private infrastructure, private water and sewer. Then there's the public system, where it's all public streets dedicated to the local jurisdictions. All improvements are built to their code, and then once they're accepted by the local jurisdiction, they will take over and maintain operation and maintenance of the utilities and the infrastructure, which is a much better option for building affordable housing. I did want to note that I am on Starlink. I'm coming from the Colorado Rocky Mountains. The only internet connection I have here is Starlink, and Starlink is actually pretty good. It's the real deal if you're in rural America. And the only problem is sometimes it'll lock up and freeze for 5, 10, 15 seconds. So if that happens, please be patient and know that I'll be back with you really quickly. In the today in the webinar, we're going to talk about two different types of subdivisions. One is a complex subdivision, which is what you see here ahead of us, which is a big subdivision, moving a lot of dirt, putting in roadways, putting in retention centers, putting in water, wastewater, stormwater. That's a major development, complex development. A simple development is really everything else. It's taking as far as building a subdivision, it's maybe you buy 50 foot of land or 500 feet of land, divide 10 lots, 50 feet apiece. It's already on an existing road. You may have to run water and sewer, but that's relatively a simple development. It's not as big as putting in a big infrastructure system. So we'll discuss both types today. And if you do get a chance to build any complex or simple developments, they're always preferred because they go faster and they are less expensive. And I am going to take myself off the camera just to give myself a little extra bandwidth, so I'll make sure that I'm doing okay. So I'm going to disappear for a moment or for the remainder of the session. This development here is Bayou Pass Village in Ruskin. The top 100 and all the lots up in the upper section up here, there's 185 lots, are part of what is called a complex development. Once we develop this and we put in all the streets and including this bottom street down here on the very bottom, the farmer next door sold us a strip of land 100 feet deep, and we divided them into 50-foot lots and basically added a phase 2 to this subdivision. So that's how simple a subdivision can be. If you already have existing infrastructure and streets in place and you want to add some additional lots or community, you can basically just plug into the existing system, and that's always advisable when you can do it. So I'm going to run through the terms. We talked about this last time. Basically, a subdivision means you're just replatting one larger parcel into 2 or more buildable lots. The two terms I want to concentrate on next are the civil engineer and the land planner. A civil engineer is an experienced professional that will design and oversee the development of your project for you. A land planner is someone who can help you conceptualize the plan for the development that you want to create and help you come up with a good layout. Now, an engineer can do that as well, but a civil engineer is limited. They're not limited, but they're being left-brained individuals. They typically tend to think more analytical and more logical, I guess, than what makes more common sense than a land planner, where a land planner may design a community based on lifestyle, how the residents will live there. A land planner may get you a more desirable layout than a civil engineer would. Sometimes a civil engineer, they look at the logistics of it. They say, well, here's a great community. We'll put the lots here. We'll put the retention pond in the back. Where a land planner may say, we want the retention pond up front because it's pretty and beautiful, and we want it to be an amenity rather than something hidden. So either one can help you with your project, but working with a land planner just gives you somewhat of an advantage in the process. Governing officials are the ones that in the local jurisdictions that have responsibility over permitting and inspection of your subdivision. An HOA is an entity to manage your affairs of the development. I have a session in the coming session on HOA, so we'll talk about that. Your entitlements, zoning, site plan approval, utility allocations, and their usage, and site landscaping approvals. All of that is something you're going to need to get if you take a raw piece of land and develop it into a subdivision. Once your subdivision or your raw land is entitled, then you can go about designing the project and building it. But until the entitlements, you basically have a piece of land that has no connections or anything to it. So you're going to be adding entitlements, which add value to the property. And then finally, the acceptance. When the work is all done on the subdivision, the inspecting local jurisdiction will basically approve your project and record the plat in the public record. And now instead of one big lot, you own several small lots. So you decide you want to move forward and build a subdivision. I talked last time about adding a little magic to your community. Basically, on my experiences from being in Florida, I got to spend a lot of time in Disney and see how they created a lot of magic in the development and work that they do. And our goal was to try to bring some of that magic into our communities, trying to combat NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So we created some first-time home buyer communities with amenities, clubhouse, swimming pool, and playgrounds. And basically, there were 5 phases in this current subdivision, although we did add a 6th phase, and I think there may be even another one now that I've retired. I want to take just a second to talk about a community building, a community clubhouse. There is when you're developing a community, if you have a number of lots in there, at some point you're going to need to have a homeowners association to take care of the property. And what we found in many of our early developments was that there's a homeowners association made up of homeowners. The association had a computer and some records and stuff. And what happened is from year to year, all those would go to somebody else's house. And it became kind of a very disorganized process. We've found that putting in a small building that you can have your homeowners meetings in, maybe have some covered dish suppers and maybe birthday parties or weddings in, is a great amenity to the community. It builds community spirit, and it can be incorporated right into the cost of in your development process. So if you have the ability to do that in a little larger scale development, it's a great investment, and I'm a great advocate for that. So when you build a subdivision, depending on whether it's a simple subdivision, a complex subdivision, whether you own the land, whether you're buying the land, there is a lot of activity happening. I've sequenced these events in a logical progression. However, your subdivision development may not follow that progression. So it depends on your experience in all the situations, whether you follow these sequences or you follow a different path. They all get you to the same place. So the first steps are you're thinking about building a subdivision. So you have to start conversations with a lender. You have to begin to assimilate some development costs, get some idea what it's going to cost, and some clue where you're going to get the money to do this. And it's really fun thinking about building a subdivision and talking about building a subdivision and working towards building one. But it comes to the bottom line. At some point, you've got to realize what the costs are and find the money to pay for it. How many lots do you need? That's a real big question. And I think if we can pause for a minute, there is an additional survey question as to how many lots per year each of you are building or anticipate building in the coming year and following 2 or 3 years. How many lots per year do you want to be able to build?
Right, and I'm going to interject there, Earl. So throw in the chat, how many homes do you currently build in a year, or how many homes are you anticipating to build in a year? So if you want to throw that number in the chat, that would be super. Back to you, Earl.
Okay, thank you. And I will let's see if I see any now. Okay, 10, 13, 16, 5 to 7, 10 to 15, 16, 12 to 16. Okay, so let's just, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to think about 15 homes a year. I guess that would be a comfortable number to work with. So, you know, are you going to build for now, or are you going to build for 2, 3, 4 years down the road? Typically, it takes about 2 years to develop a subdivision. So obviously, you would like at least a 2-year supply out of it, which means you have to start working 2 years in advance. So if that was the case, if you started now and took you 2 years and then you built 30 lots, you'd be out of those lots by the end of 2 years, and you would need to be in that process again. So we'll talk more about planning as we go forward, but it's really important to think about what your needs are today and for the short-term future in less than 5 years. So what size lots? What size lots do you need? Start looking for a development team. Find a land planner, which could be the engineer. Get to know your county land development code. I always suggest downloading a copy or reading a copy of the county's land development code, so you have somewhat of an understanding of what you're in for. You meet with your local governing officials, and again, you can discuss the process for subdivision development. And then you should know this by now, but is there an affordable housing division or department within your city or county jurisdiction that oversees you? And then you should get to know them. Hopefully you know them by now, but sometimes a local housing staff can help you work through the planning and zoning process because they have expertise in working with that department. Or you may just find a neighborhood champion, somebody that's maybe retired or been in housing for a long time and wants to work with you and help you, but you need to, you need to get some expert team members on your team to help you plan for your new development. So who do you need on your development team? Basically, your development team is everybody you're going to work with in the process of putting the development together. You're going to have a real estate broker, a land planner, a professional engineer, a surveyor, lenders, environmental and soils engineers, real estate lawyer, a very strong accounting and financial person, local jurisdiction authorities, site development contractor, a project manager, someone either hired or part of your staff, and maybe a landscape architect. So the developer, their responsibilities are you're going to acquire and develop the subdivision. You're going to assure the delivery of buildable lots to your specifications, keep the community maintained throughout the entire process and throughout all sales, maybe establish an HOA. I mean, here's the thing. You're going to go through this process. You're going to develop a piece of land into a community, and you want to make sure through that construction process of your homes that the property is looking good. It doesn't help you if the common areas are overgrown in your development or neighbors aren't taking care, homeowners aren't taking care of their property. So as a developer, you want to make sure your development stays pristine all the way through your sales because it'll help you in your sales effort. And then make sure your site is safe, no open holes or places for kids to play that could cause them to get in trouble. And then we want to start marketing to our end buyer, and I'll touch more on that in a little bit. So selecting the site development engineer, he is going to be one of the biggest partners you have in this project. So you want to hire the best that you can afford. And I'm going to take a minute to just touch on that. When you're hiring this professional, they need to be a really good professional. I'm going to talk about the traits that we need very shortly. But I try not to work with volunteers where I can avoid it. The reason for that is that I want to maintain control. And if I have an engineer that volunteers his time for me on a subdivision I'm doing, they may be very busy doing other things. And there's a lot of decisions and things that have to happen pretty quickly. And I want control over the people that are developing our community. So I try to find good professional people and pay them what they're worth to help us on the process. And we lean on them very heavily for their expertise through the project. You could ask your land planner if he knows of an engineer. He may help you interview some engineers. You can talk to the government agency in your city or county that does plan reviewing and ask them for their recommendations. And lastly, look on job sites to find signs for engineers who've done engineering projects. The site development engineer should be a individual that has experience in subdivision development. They should be a licensed professional engineer. Preferably, they should have a staff. They should be staff. They should have maybe a surveyor team on there. They may have professional staff, secretaries, receptionists. They may have field inspectors or field engineers that come out. You want a big team because if you're developing a larger project, sometimes decisions have to be made. And I've had experiences with small shops with an engineer and a part-time secretary. They don't really work real well unless you're doing a real small project and you don't need a lot of attention. But there's a lot of activities that need to be monitored from time to time, and you need to have an engineering firm that has the capacity to keep up with your demand, because we're trying to build a subdivision in 90, 120, 180 days, and so you need your engineer to be up on the game. It's nice if the engineering company also does surveying, because then it avoids a lot of finger pointing that sometimes happens during a construction process. And so, if they have a surveyor on their team, that's great. They want to obviously be in good standing with the local jurisdiction. They want to be solvent and profitable, because I've worked with engineers that are solvent and profitable and engineers that are not. And engineers that are not are always chasing their own dollars, trying to get paid. They're always asking for extra money for this or that. And you really need to work with somebody that has a little bit of staying capacity and some financial wherewithal in their team. You need an engineer who's familiar with developing and development pricing. A good engineering firm will bid out many projects for their clients. So very often they're going to be familiar with the costs in a subdivision. As example, how much does it cost to put in 8-inch sewer at 12 feet below grade? So they should be able to help you get pricing on that. And then if they have any experience in affordable housing, that's a bonus. That's a plus for you. Finding land, I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on that, except to tell you that when I was with Florida Home Partnership, we had a hard time finding land, and we did a Got Land campaign, that little logo sign right up here on the lower right side. It was a campaign we had. It said FHP is buying, and we posted that everywhere. And as a result, we were able to acquire additional lots that we needed to build our subdivisions. So one of the sources for finding land is to working with a real estate broker, realtor. And I always suggest using a buyer's agent. If you call up from a sign that you see on a piece of property and you talk to the listing agent, he works for the seller. So his loyalty typically goes to the seller. When you're a buyer, you would like typically a buyer's agent to represent you because you're going to need to lean on them quite a bit during this process. I always like working with brokers, even though I am one myself. I like working with brokers because this whole project rests on closing on the land, and they will work really hard to help you stay favorable in the eyes of the seller so that you can get the property closed. When you work with a buyer's agent or a buyer's broker, you will probably sign an agreement with them that says, I will be loyal to you, you will be loyal to me, and we will work together, and a sum will be paid from the proceeds for your services. Typically, if you buy a piece of land that has a for sale sign on it, there's already commission built into that structure, and typically the seller will pay the commission for both agents in that transaction. However, if you find a piece of property that's not listed and you want to go after it, it may be advantageous to negotiate the best price for that parcel, and then out of your own pocket, pay the real estate broker for their services instead of asking the seller to pay for that. So that's a really negotiable opportunity for you there. So you're going to start building a subdivision. You think you might have found a piece of land. You got to start the dollar conversation. You got to talk about money. It's got to come in sometime. So you're going to begin getting the acquisition and development dollars in place. You're going to contact the housing assistance council, possibly about shop loans or other loan products. They do have a really good line of funds that can help you with that process. You can check with the local jurisdiction. Maybe they have some federal funds or something that you could tap into for the development and or construction of the site. Talk to local banks, credit unions, nonprofit lenders, and then investigate other sources. So you got to start that conversation at some point on the dollars. So you're going to get a real estate attorney involved if you can. You don't have to have one, but it's advisable. And I look at real estate attorneys in two different classes. Both of them are real estate attorneys, but one is a general real estate attorneys and the other may specialize in land use matters. Land use matters is perhaps zoning. It may be accomplishing your entitlements. It may be getting everything in place that you need, maybe HOA or subdivision documents. They can help you with that. And preparing your contract. That's important. So if you have the access to an attorney, it's wise to use them. Money well spent. We had a volunteer attorney on our board when I was executive director, and he was a real estate attorney, and so he was able to draft all of our documents for acquisition of land. But I did work with a land use attorney to get my zoning and other pieces in place. So you're going to select the land. You're going to buy raw land or existing lots. You ask yourself, does it fulfill my vision? Looking at the neighborhood, the litmus test I always use, if I woke up here in the morning and looked out my window, what would I see? Is it pretty? Is it nice? Is it give me a good feeling? Or is it ugly and against, old buildings and railroad tracks and a lot of other unfavorable things? So if it's not good enough for you, probably it's not going to be good enough for your clients. And then look at what are the future growths and trends for this particular area where the property is located. Look at what were the previous uses of the land. That's important for understanding if there could be any contamination on the property. Are the utilities nearby? Do you need well and septic? Does the ground have good percolation for that? And then once you select the land, then it'd be time to move forward and continue to investigate it a little bit further. I wanted to just make a mention to look at the sign here. We'll talk more about signage, but when we go under contract with a piece of property, we get permission from the seller to erect a coming soon sign. And we developed this sign for one of our communities in Ruskin, and it starts the phone ringing, which is something that you really need to do. I want to draw attention to the prices there. This was in the early 2000s. I sure would like to get houses out the door for the 80s today, in today's market. But I'm going to take just a second, deviate a minute. I talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it a lot. What you want to do as a developer, whether you're developing 4 lots or whether you're developing 40 lots or 400 lots, is you want to start activity as soon as you can on that property. You're going to have to get money from somewhere. And so the first question any lender, anybody with money is going to say, what's the demand for your development? And so if you are posting signs with your phone number, I would suggest opening up getting a form that you generate when somebody calls about the property. You put down the date, their name, their address, their phone number, the typical things. I ask for the household income, what's the family size, and then we tabulate all of that information into a spreadsheet, into Excel spreadsheet that would list the name of the clients, their household income, family size, and all of that. That then information, you just continue every day. At the end of the day, just put all that information into a spreadsheet. before I left Florida Home Partnership, we were getting over 2,000 inquiries a year, 2,300 inquiries a year. So when I would apply for funding, I would always include all of those spreadsheets, maybe 50, 60 pages that had the name of everyone who was calling in. So it's really, really important to show the demand and document that demand in the form of a simple spreadsheet that you can share with people that would like to invest. So that's just a little secret that I've used, and it works quite well in the process. So you want to make sure your land is clean. You want to take somebody from your staff, maybe you walk through the land, look for piles of debris or trash or old houses or anything so you know what you can expect in there. You can get a phase one site inspection, and what that phase one inspection shows is that you hire a company to come in and they do an evaluation. Typically, it takes a couple of months to go through that process. They'll take aerial photos and see what the history of that property is, if there's pesticides on it or there's asbestos on it or whatever issues you have. A phase one site evaluation is a study by an independent group that will give you probably a 100-page report on the condition of your property, and the last page or two has the conclusions and tells you whether you need to do more work or tells you what you could do to remediate some of the challenges that are on there. And if you're going to get funding from federal sources, a phase one is usually something that's required in the process. And you want to make sure the land is clean and you don't have any contaminant or pollution issues. So you want to find a design that works for you. You can start out with a land planner or with yourself. You buy a piece of property. How am I going to best get the best usage out of this? You can lay out some sample lots and just start with a hand sketch just to give you an idea of what the property is going to yield for you. This is probably the heart of what I do in creating the development as a sources and uses chart. All of you that are in nonprofit work have probably used these at one time or another. And this chart across the top are the sources of funding. I have CDBG funding, SHIP funding, home funding, SHIP funding, it's recycled SHIP funding, shop funding, recycled shop funding, and then a loan. And so on the left, those are my sources across the top. On the left side coming down are my uses, land cost, appraisal, basically all your costs, survey, environmental, geotechnical site work, site signage, all the way down to the end. You total it up, and you'll find that some of the costs can be covered by some funding agencies, but they will fund one thing, but they won't fund another. And so you have to be careful as to what you're paying from what funds. But this sources and uses is a living, working document. It's a simple spreadsheet. I am not a financial wizard at all, but I can create a simple spreadsheet like this and basically begin when I start estimating, plug all my costs in here. If I don't know a number, I'm going to work as hard as I can to get it, get an estimate of it and plug in my estimates. This whole project down here at the bottom was costing $1,556,000 at 71 lots, came out to $21,922 per lot. Typically, I always have a date on this, but this was way outdated, and so I had the date taken off of this form for the presentation. But you can modify this, always looking at the current date to make sure you have the current version of it. But it is a good way to begin putting down your numbers and coming up with some costs to put the project together. So you're going to go into a contract, and you want to extend the closing date as long as you possibly can. You have a lot of work to do. You want to get your entitlements in place before closing. You want your zoning done. You want to make sure you can get water and sewer, utility. You can get everything that you need before you close. You don't have to do that, but if you're going to buy a piece of property that's zoned agricultural, maybe 10 acres, and you want to put 40 homes on it, you better know that you're able to do that before you invest the money in closing the property. So typically you try to get all your entitlements, your zoning, and all your utility commitments in place before you go and close on the land. So if you're going to develop a real estate contract, as I mentioned, we had a board attorney. It was a board. He's an attorney, and he was a member of our board and worked on he developed the work for us, developed our real estate contracts for us. And it's best to work with a real estate attorney. If you can't, you could use a standard land contract, but you'd want to probably add some provisions. But at a minimum, your land contract should have the following information. Who are the parties to this contract? Who are the buyers and sellers? What's the legal description of the property? What's the price and terms? What's the size of the parcel? Who's going to hold the escrow and what's the escrow amount? What's the closing date, the closing location? Basically, all the standard items that you would find in your state's land contract. But then you'll want to add some special provisions, like that the seller is aware of no environmental hazards on their property, that the seller will allow the buyer to obtain zoning before the closing at the buyer's expense, and that the seller will cooperate with the buyer to obtain zoning. Now, many times a farmer or someone will sell a piece of property, does not have proper zoning, and in those situations, we would ask for them to work with us, and our leverage with them, if you can call it leverage, or our to get them to cooperate with us, we tell the zoning, the sellers, that we're going to survey the property, we're going to do boring on the property, we're going to do traffic counts, we're going to do all kinds of work that needs to be done to this parcel. So if we're not able to close for some reason, we will give the seller all of the information that we have obtained. So they will probably end up with a rezoned piece of property and all the supporting documentation to go with it. So also special items to include is that the property is adjacent to a public roadway, that there's no spike strips or individual property lines between your property and the street right-of-way, that the seller will furnish copies of all available reports, surveys, inspections that they have, and finally, that they will allow you to erect a closing soon or coming soon sign on your property as soon as you acquire it. I want to talk about zoning bonuses, density bonuses, bonuses that you may get, affordable housing bonuses you may be entitled to, something that you want to consider in your development. A density bonus means that you would get more lots because you're building affordable housing. It's restricted to affordable housing in the initial sale. They may give you reduced setbacks, waive some fees, expedited permit and plan reviews, reduced impact fees, and possibly even donations from a municipal tree bank. So these are all things to check out, and I'll be glad to go into detail more on those if we have any questions at closing. So you're going to work with your seller to apply for the zoning and give them the incentive that if you don't close on the property, the zoning becomes theirs. Completing the zoning can take 3 to 12 months, depends on where you are. You need to assure your zoning before closing, and again, promise the buyer that if you don't close, all that information becomes theirs. Creating an image is really important for the reason I suggested. We started developing subdivisions a pretty generic way. One of my coworkers back at the time, Hope, told me that we need to create communities that compel buyers to feel good about themselves. The upper left sign was called Homes for Waimama, and that was the last name of that type. From then on, we came to nice names: Sunset Hills, Bayou Pass, Hidden Creek, Summerview Oaks. And so we try to create an image for each of the communities that we develop. So we're going to start developing the specifications for the land. And developing a subdivision is a lot like buying sausage from the butcher. the longer the sausage, the more expensive it is. I was told this by a land developer back in my early days of developing. And in a subdivision, the more street frontage you have on every lot, the more expensive it becomes. So it's kind of like sausage. You want to cut it into the smallest pieces to get the most for your money, the most development. When you're developing a subdivision, subdivisions, when you're building a home, your lot drainage is one of three different types. It's a type A, where everything, which I think is the most common, where everything drains to the street. There is a type B, where the front yard slopes and drains to the street, and the backyard drains somewhere in the back, maybe a retention pond or something. And then a type C, which is, I'm sorry, a type B is front and back, and a type C, everything drains to the back. So I prefer to develop lots that are 50 by 100. That meets the codes in the jurisdictions I've worked with. And I've discovered that in doing that, I come out with about 3.8 to 3.9 homes per acre after I deduct common area space, streets, sidewalks, playgrounds, rights of way, drainage retention, amenities, lift stations. So if I look at 20 acres, I know I'm going to get somewhere short of 80 lots. So it's just a number. When I use 50 by 100 lots, by the time you take everything else out of there, you end up with about just under 4 lots to acre. So you want to take advantage of everything in the developing stage. Let me back up one here. You want to work to grade your soils to the exact inch. And whether you grade your property in the type A, B, or C drainage pattern. When you develop a subdivision, you'll end up with, if it's a complex subdivision, it'll have streets in it and infrastructure in. And it's better if you can ask your engineer to grade the property close to what it'll be when you deliver the home. There is a thing called tabletopping, where you buy you build the subdivision, the developer comes in and makes the site developer makes all the land level, like the top of a table. Then you come in and you have to create your soils. Typically, that's going to cause you to have extra dirt that you needed to have imported in, and then you've got to pay to have it hauled out. So you want to try to the best of your ability to get the lands worked and as tight as you can. Work with your engineer, work with your builder to get the specifications exactly as you need them, so you'll develop lots that are really close to what you need. So you're going to have all the facts. You've been collecting facts. Now you need to analyze those facts. You need to develop a pro forma that says it's going to cost me this much to develop the land, and I can sell it for this much. It's going to work. I'm going to notice that things are beginning to make sense. They work. I sleep on it a couple of days, and if moving forward is the right thing to do, you're going to kind of sense it internally. And if it's wrong, you're going to find out you're making excuses. Well, I can't get the zoning, or the water doesn't work, or we got site issues that we can't conquer. So if you're going to make the decision to go forward, you're going to take that due diligence, and you're going to say either I'm going to go forward or I'm going to stop. This is really your last chance, your last exit ramp to get off before you decide if I want to take this project forward. So you begin to test your assumptions. You've decided to move forward. You're going to start spending money a little bit. You're going to start with the zoning. You need to get an appraisal to see if that property appraises for what if the 71 lots were $21,000 a piece, do they appraise? Is it work for us? And then what's the timing? You need to begin to look at your timing on the process. When you have a good project going forward, others begin to support it. The stars begin to align. You begin to attract momentum. And basically, everybody wants to be part of a winning project. You're going to see people coming out of the award work to help you move this project forward. So at this point, you're going to move forward. You're now going to start to spend more money. You're going to do soil samples. The engineer is going to begin to test the soil. He's going to do boring holes to see what is the ground like underneath where the roads are going to be, the homes, so they know how to develop the project. They're going to do traffic studies, which measures existing traffic to see if the impact from your subdivision will require turn lanes or additional roadway width. You'll develop a preliminary plan and meet with the government agencies, and you're going to continue to develop your cost estimates, and that's an ongoing process. So prior to closing, you're going to get your zoning in place, get your conceptual preliminary site plan in place, and get your utility commitments in place for water, sewer, and all the utilities that basically that you need. So at this point, you're going to make a decision to go forward, have faith, leap, and the net will appear. Your new due diligence is now behind you, and you begin to spend even more money. Now you're going to close on the land. Once you close on the land, you can start to fully design it. You may hire the staff that you need, and again, turning back is really not an option at this point. I'm going to add, I've got 4 slides here that I want to just touch on really quickly for insurance and bonding. Bonding is an agreement to guarantee compliance or performance. So if I build a subdivision and the jurisdiction wants me to provide a warranty bond, that means I'm going to invest in a bond that shows that if there are any failures in this subdivision, I will commit to repairing them in the warranty period, which is a year or 2 years. So I will begin to get the bonding for that. That's basically what a bond is. Basic two types in all construction is general liability, which covers the owner, the contractors, the developer's liability, and there's worker compensation in case someone gets injured on the job. An interesting thing is that if you are a contractor or you do building and you have a workers' comp policy and you own this subdivision, it might be that if you hire a general contractor or a site development contractor and they have workers' comp, that workers' comp covers everybody working on that project, whether they're employees of that company or not. If we have a development contractor that hires a trenching contractor, for example, and that trenching contractor's workers' comp expires, that's going to have to be paid for under the developer's workers' comp policy. And if their policy expired, then it's going to go up to your policy. So everything runs uphill in the terms of liabilities. The attorneys want to see who they can get their fingers into. So I would suggest, as an organization, if you have $1 million workers' comp and $1 million general liability coverage, that you always require that any contractors or developers that work for you carry at least that same amount of coverage as you have. Basically covered those 2 types of insurance, workers' comp, general liability. On a site development project, there is going to be automobiles and vehicles there, so you probably want to have a automobile policy for $1 million policy as well, required by your site development, required from your site development contractor. Different types of bonds that are available. A bid bond, you may ask that your bidders submit a bid bond when they submit their proposal that shows if you award them, they will be able to deliver the project. A surety bond assures the municipality that the developer will complete the improvements to public infrastructure and development required per the plans and specs. And then a payment and performance bond, you may require that to demonstrate that your development contractor will be able to pay and will pay all his labor and supply bills. I typically don't like working with those types of bonds because they become cumbersome in the project. And in the third session, we'll talk about some ways that we can work with the contractor to basically offset those. And then finally, improvement warranty bond, as I had mentioned, basically covers the warranty period. And many nonprofits have a difficult time getting bonds. Bonding is something that you got to have some financial capacity in order to obtain a bond. And if you can't get one on your own, you may want to work with your contractor to see if they can assist in getting bonded, because most site development contractors have a pretty good bonding capability. And that really takes us to the end. I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly. I'm sure there'll be some questions, and I'll be glad to take any questions that there are.
So at this point, you can type your question in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand and you can unmute to ask your question. Questions are welcome. Jason?
Yeah, hey, thank you so much. This is very timely and much appreciated. I have a question a little bit about the bond and insurance type of things. I normally try to have a subject matter expert on my board in all the fields I work with, and I've never really thought of insurance until now. So I'm just wondering what type of, so I can get more advice on this, what type of subject matter expert? Would a local insurance agent be somebody who would know this type of stuff? Or is there a more specialized type of subject matter expert that I could seek out in my community that can help me with some of these questions I have?
It all depends on where you're located. If you're getting a little feedback here, I'm not sure why. If you're located near a larger city, there may be more of an availability of specialists that focus on bonding. My best recommendation would be to ask your design engineer, your civil engineer, who do you know that does the most subdivision bonding? Who do you think I can develop a relationship with? And those relationships basically take a long time. The first time we got a subdivision bond, it was really, really difficult. If I had known I had to get a subdivision bond, I may have not ever done the subdivision development, which is one reason that you keep moving this thing forward and you deal with all the obstacles as they come up. But in our instance, we had to apply for the bond. Our financial strength at that point was not real strong. The bond amount wasn't real high. And then we had a guarantor co-sign our application for bond. After that initial bond period, then in the next subdivision, we went back to the bonding agency and they worked more with us. They're committing their money in case you don't stand up to do what you're supposed to do. So it would probably be your civil engineer would be a great place to start asking him who they work with.
Thank you, Earl. We do have a couple questions in the chat. Do these principles apply equally if multifamily housing is part of the plan?
I think it can. Developing land is developing land. I've developed them for townhomes and single family homes, so it's just a different skill set. You need different knowledge. It could be a mixed community. So I think a lot of it's the same. It's just a lot of it depends on the development, but conceptually, I would say if I was making this for developing a multifamily property, I'd probably change some of the slides, but essentially a lot of it is relatively the same thing.
Okay, and Bill has the question of infrastructure and community amenities are always challenging. Did you find subsidy to cover those, or did you have to raise home prices to cover those?
Was that Bill Lazar that asked that question?
Yes.
I'm not surprised. Bill's the one that's going to make me think this morning.
He's laughing too.
So you have a whole site development budget. I mean, you're bringing in infrastructure. You look at the entire project and its total cost, the acquisition, the engineering, the infrastructure, landscaping, basically everything you have to do to get a completed development. and then essentially, that's your budget, and then you've got to find your different sources that that will work with you to provide funding mechanisms. And it's just all over the place. The Federal Home Loan Bank is another process. They're hard to work with. Their money's good, but there's a lot of reporting documents that have to be a part of that as well. So, but it is it's it all falls into the budget. You just have to go on a mission, whether you can get home funds from your local jurisdictions, whether you can get CDBG funds, whether you can get money. Just depends on the type of development that you're doing and the funds that you get. So that's kind of hard to answer in a general question.
Okay, and Sylvia asked, is there a template of the calculation spreadsheet available? We might could work on that.
Tell me ask me that again, please, Vicki.
For the calculation spreadsheet, she wants to know if there's a template for that.
Are you like the sources and uses? Is that?
That's what I'm thinking. If you could answer that, Sylvia. She also has another question. Is there a network of practitioners available for persons that want to start getting familiar with, Stephanie's put it up there, wanting to get familiar with this sector and business? So are there a network of other people that are available for persons to get familiar with us?
HAC is a great resource for that. They offer a lot of training and conferences. Locally, some communities, they work together well in the community. The nonprofits can work together and plan, and they're not threatening each other all the time, but they can work together for the better good of things. It's really a regional thing. On a national point, a national perspective, really HAC comes to my mind. It's the first thought that came to my mind, but I'm not sure of others. As far as if she was talking about the sources and uses form that I had displayed and talked about, that's just a very simple Excel spreadsheet, and I can put it together. Basically, anybody can. And
we shared it in the. We did share that in the chat, so we do have that in the chat for her as well. Another question is, Michael wants to know, is you offer a range of sources in your spreadsheet. We haven't worked with SHOP or SHIP grants in the past. Do you find these easy to locate and navigate?
Well, SHIP is it depends on where you are. SHIP is a state housing initiative program for Florida. So if you're in Pennsylvania, you're not going to find a SHIP program. But in Florida, it's increasingly difficult. I can ask Bill Lazar about that too. It's increasingly difficult to get your hands on SHIP funds because they're not always there and they diminish somewhat. But that's a story for another day. SHOP funds is a HUD program for self-help housing. Habitat uses it. The USDA self-help grantees use it. But if you're building individual homes, that's not something that is applicable. We talked about doing a whole section on funding as a fourth component to this, but it's really varied depending on jurisdiction. So, you really got to begin to know the lay of the land. And I'm going to take this 1 minute here to advocate for getting out into the community and opening your mouth. Going to your county affordable housing office, going to public meetings, trying to understand the resources that are available, and working with your to find and uncover resources. So once you get into a project, they start to show up and you begin to hear about them, you begin to inquire about them. But there's not a national database that I'm aware of that provides funding. So you know, it's just going to take some creativity. And the best advice I have is be proactive in your community and start long before you develop to find and identify those sources and work to see that they fit the need and they fit the developments that you're trying to work on.
That's great advice. Jeffrey would like to know is, do you charge a developer fee to the end user? If so, what's the percentage?
Most of these developments were done in the USDA self-help housing program. In that program, as a grantee of the USDA, we would get a fee for building the homes. So we put the development and everything, all of our administrative costs into one package, and we would get grants to do that. Typically, there's really I haven't historically added a development fee. However, if you're not in the self-help program, then you could really, if it costs you $25,000 to develop a lot, and the appraised value for that lot is $35,000, and you've got your home construction, your lot costs, everything else, so long as the total fits under the approved the appraised value, you're certainly welcome to charge that as a whole package for what the house would be. If I'm going to retail lots, if somebody wants to buy a lot from me, then we'd discuss that on a case by case basis. And I don't really have a percentage that I use. It's just, you know, it's basically the difference between the cost and the value, what the land is worth, how much equity is in there. You're entitled to that as a developer, just like a private developer. Whether you choose to claim it or not, that's a whole separate issue.
Michael has the question of, do you sell at market price, or can you build with a mind to maximize affordability while still building quality buildings?
I don't know what market price is. I mean, I'm a real estate broker, so I kind of understand market price, but in affordable housing, you know, building affordable housing is really all about what can I put in that this person can afford. And that's really the limit. I mean, if you're limited to people that are at 80% of median income and the interest rate is 5%, the total maximum mortgage amount is going to be obvious probably for every client that you serve. So your goal is to stay under that or at that amount so that they can afford to buy it. So so no, I don't really have a standard markup, but basically it's really the difference between the cost and what the appraised value is, and what your client, and most important, what the client can afford.
Right. And working with self-help, I think that's a different way to go as well. Then last question we have is, have you utilized TIF for home ownership?
I don't know what that is. SHIF is what?
No, TIF, tax increment financing. Have you
No,
utilized tax increment financing?
I personally have not.
Okay. We'd like to, Earl has shared a lot of good information today about subdivisions. So at this time, we would like to, thanks everyone, but don't leave if you want to hang out for the learning tool, which is a bid document that Earl has that he's going to go over with everyone that still wants to hang out with us. And don't forget to sign up for the third webinar, which is on May 25th, and that will take us to the completion.
Right. That's 2 weeks from today.
Yes.
And this next subject is on is preparing the bid documents for an actual development process. And if you're going to develop a subdivision and you want to put it out to bid, this package is basically everything that you're going to need. And I need to get some guidance from you, Vicki, as to how do I get to my next session, or from Dan, or Somebody behind it. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, there, but
That was my
Just-
next question as well. You got it.
magic. Now, the next question is how do I make it work? That, got it. Okay. Okay, let me.
So we
see
do
the
have in the chat, while Earl's looking at that, we do have in the chat the sample bid documents. So if you would like to, I think you can download a copy of it from the chat. So look at the chat. It says sample bid documents. It's highlighted in blue, and you should be able to get to these bid documents.
I can't move this. I don't know what I need.
You'd
Oh,
have
there
to
we go.
share on
Okay,
your
there we
screen,
go.
Earl.
Am I not shared?
You are.
Okay.
I see.
Hey,
It's
share.
okay, Earl. This is Dan. Yeah, if you need me to click through it again, you might need to click actively with your mouse, and then start paging up and down. But I can easily go through it. Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
let's see. So what we're going to go through is a optional period here. I'm going to go through it pretty quick. This is something that they made available to download. When we develop a subdivision, we go out and have bid documents. We have a bid package, which includes blueprints and then a bound set of specifications. Bid documents has the contracts, sample contracts, everything in it you're going to need is basically in this package. And I'm going to run through it pretty quick. A lot of it is boring stuff, but I just want to give you an overview as to what you're seeing here, and then you can look through it as your own. This is just as a sample. It's something that I have used and developed myself over a period of years in trying to run projects more efficiently. I've stolen this concept from engineers that I work with that would have plans and specs on the job. When we award a bid, I give the development contractor about 4 sets of prints and 4 sets of specifications. I always want a set of approved documents, drawings, and specifications on the job at all times in case there's ever any disputes that we are running into. And so basically this very first document here is this is the advertisement for bid. Basically, it's the first page. I can see this is a little challenging to navigate through here. Do you have any advice, Dan? Oh, you're doing it just fine. Okay. Well, I want to back up a second. Okay. Here is the advertisement for bid. Basically, this is like the legal notice. It says we're putting this project out to bid. The name of the project is this. We will be receiving bids until 2 p.m. on March 30th, 2017. The objective is to develop 145 unit subdivision. A set of documents may be obtained by the engineer. Project consists of so many homes. The owner anticipates starting awarding a contract on April 6th and wants to commence within 30 days thereafter. And basically, it just gives all the legal jargon to the bid. This is a bid that we're going to put out. And typically, we try to mirror public bidding process, except in how we award the bids, which is a little different than they do on the government level. But basically, then I have the advertisement to bid, then I write a letter to the bidders, and I include everything in these documents that I think is really important to me and that I need to emphasize. So here is a personal letter I've written to everybody that's going to bid on the project. Again, talk about the project. Here I mentioned things that are really important. One is this program requires compliance to HUD's Section 3 guidelines, which is something that's always been difficult to get contractors to comply with. We have the expectation that the perimeters of our development will be sodded beyond the silt fence. I've always argued with the contractors about where the sodding starts and stops. It talks about Federal Department of Environmental Protection, MPDES permits, and those requirements. It's just a very basic cover point that, and then I tell the contractors there's no bonding on this particular project. So it's just my letter to the contractors, just giving my overview of the project. And I tell contractors we will select from the lowest responsible bidder and work to negotiate a mutually beneficial contract with one contractor. We anticipate moving dirt in late April 2017. And gentlemen, sharpen your pencils, and then I sign off. So then we get into the instructions to bidders. This is the actual bid document. And so this tells them all of the things that they need to know about while they're bidding. I'm not going to go through the details of it, but basically what is in here, all of the items that are necessary for bidding, how you submit your bids, acceptance and award, what we look at from that point to determine the bidder, the successful contractor. Here is our here's the basis of which we award bids. We lower it to the lowest responsible negotiated bid to contractor that is consistent with the intent of the contract documents. It's the intent of the owner to receive and review bids on the due date. After the review date, each bid, the owner will work with each interested contractor to negotiate a contract that is in the best interest of the owner in determining the lowest responsible bidder, the and your start, when you're available to start, how long it'll take you to complete the project, and if, for example, let's say a bidder says, you know, Earl, you spec a certain type of road base material, but we have a state approved road base that's not in your specifications, and we have an ample supply of that. If you would allow us to substitute this, we could save $75,000 on the development, something like that. Those are the kind of conversations that we enter into. One word of caution as a director or the boss of this project for your agency, if you're using government funds, you got to be squeaky clean in this process. Just because you're negotiating, it doesn't do anything to line your pockets because you're working for the nonprofit or the agency that you work for. So you've got to make sure that you conduct these negotiations in a transparent way that doesn't include sodding my backyard to my personal residence or paving my driveway. You don't want to go down that road, but this is really all about what's best for the development. And now, if you're a private developer using private funds and building private developments, you can make all the deals you want. But when you're negotiating in the public eye, in the public process with public dollars, basically you have to be pretty squeaky clean. So you work with your engineer and you negotiate and find who is able to maybe find some engineering that would save some money, and we can get it approved and bring our project in better for us. So that's basic. Normally, when you go to a public bid, they open the bids and the lowest bidder, apparent lowest bidder, gets the contract. Typically, that sometimes works, but I like to try to have a little more hand in seeing if we can fine craft a bid that's a little more custom to our organization and more favorable for our buyers in the long run. So basically, a lot of this is a lot of boilerplate stuff. This here is a land development contract. This would be the contract that that we sign with them to do the work. Just a sample of what that contract is like. All of the forms that are attached to it. These are sample lien waivers that we request to be used by subcontractors, partial and full lien waivers. All of that's in the document request. And again, your state will be different. If you're in Utah, your documents may be different than what they are in Florida. They will be probably for lien waivers under the different laws. Contractor's affidavit is in here. they're making some certain certifications in the bidding process. This is their actual bid, their proposal, where they are bidding to you the bid document that they turn in. Come on. Trying to back up a second here. Aha. Oh my goodness. This is a sample of what our notice to proceed looks like, a real simple letter that we would be sending out that we notify you to proceed. Typically, that notice to proceed is the trigger that starts the calendar turning in bidding. It's a sample change order form here. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a difficult time. This is a chart that you're gonna sign up with somebody. Time is really critical on a development. If you're on a time schedule, you want your developed lots, you want to start selling on a certain date. So in Florida, where I was building, it's not uncommon to get some monsoon rains during the summer, and we would have to document the times that there were delays. And wherever this form is here, it highlights some of the delays, the time delays, and you can justify them. So here they are right here. Basically, well, it's in here. You do documenting your delays.
Earl, I can try to maneuver that a little slower
Well, I
if you
think
want.
I'm probably down to about the end. There really isn't a lot more. There's a lot of good information in here. If you download these packages that are provided, and I don't know if they're in a Word document, but you can use these as templates to start to create your own documents, and you see what's necessary to be in a project. But when we would do a project, we would take this entire document, we would print it out front to back, spiral bound, put a nice pretty cover on it, and it would be the Bible. All the rules for that contract are right within that, are within the project, are all within that contract. And then there are certain provisions. For example, if there is a conflict between the spec book and the blueprints, what governs? If there are, how do you deal with those types of issues? If the specifications say you should use 4-inch steel pipe and the print shows 4-inch plastic pipe, who prevails? What prevails? All of that is in these documents to show you basically how to run your how to document your project. So for the novice developer, the experienced developer, everything that you're going to need in some form or another in bidding out a project and managing that project through to completion will be in these specifications. And I strongly suggest you take the time to look through them and acquaint yourself with them. And I'm not going to go any further than that on this particular subject. But that's the intent, and I just kind of wanted to walk you through and see what's in here. It should be a pretty much A to Z compilation of all the different documents needed to develop a subdivision.
So I wanted to share with you as well that if you're unable to download, upload the documents, that they will be updated and posted with the PowerPoint and the recording later today or tomorrow. So just, you can watch out for those as well. Earl, we did have a couple of questions from Michael. He said, he's asking, do you include amenities like sidewalks and street lights in your bids?
Okay, I don't know what, I don't think a sidewalk is an amenity. I think it's a necessity. A playground is an amenity to me. A park is an amenity. Sidewalks are kind of, if it's required under the code, it's a necessity. Street, for bringing that up because I didn't include it in here. Street lights are real interesting, and you need to get with your power company to talk about how they do it. But when I've done developments, the last subdivision I did is we work with the power company during the infrastructure period while the site is being developed to run underground lines in for street lights. We have agreed in advance with the utility company, and this is usually negotiated during the construction process, that they will come in and they will have a subcontractor who will run underground lines and put street lights in. Now, the thing is, street lights aren't free. There's a money attached to them. So what we have done in Florida Home Partnership and our developments is we developed the first subdivisions we developed didn't have street lights. They were dark, just black as the ace of spades. You could not see after sunset. It was pitch black unless people had their porch lights on. So we discovered the necessity for street lights. So then we had street lights put in, and then we found out that we had to pay for street lights. When a public development, we're using public infrastructure, one thing that you do is develop a street lighting district. Okay, so let's say you're developing a 40-unit subdivision. You would have to get approval of majority of the lot owners in that development, 21 lot owners, to agree to make a street lighting district. So then you get your street lights installed, and as a developer, every month you're going to get a bill for the street lights, and that would be something I would put into as a separate line item in the sources and uses chart as street lights, and then at some point the municipality, county, city, whoever has jurisdiction will hold a meeting and they will vote on forming that street light district. At that time, then a tax bill is generated for all 40 lots in your subdivision for a prorated share on an annual basis for the street lighting district. Now, as a developer, if you own 40 lots and you've sold 20 of them and you have 20 lots left, you're going to get the bill for those 20 lots until you get a new buyer for each of those. So you have to be prepared for that. But I would not consider streetlights in anything, 15, 20 unit subdivision, anything bigger than that, where you have internal streetlights are pretty critical. And, it's just another thing you have to be prepared to work on. And I would get with your utility company to understand that process.
Okay, our last question, I think, Earl, is you have to secure financing before you bid the job to the contractor. How do you know how much financing you will need, and what happens if you're substantially over or under?
Great, that's wonderful. And you can get the money, God bless you. You're doing something I can't do. I don't ever see that happen too much. But that goes back to the sources and uses chart, and it's a really difficult process because you're not going to know what your bid is until you get your bid. But again, this is where it helps to work with a really, really experienced engineer. And if your site engineer is doing similar developments in your community, they're going to have some pretty good idea. I would have my expectation that my developer would give me, or my engineer would give me, some sort of a cost estimate. But in the same vein, I've had, in my last development I had an engineer that I worked with, really, really good engineer, knew a lot of site development contractors. And one of them, he said, hey, Bayou Pass is going to be developing, and would you mind taking a set of prints and giving us an estimate on it? So, somebody's looking at the prints ahead of time, and before the thing ever goes out to bid, they may, give you a rough idea of what it's going to cost. So you don't know that. When I'm doing that sources and uses, If I think something's going to cost me $20, I'm going to write down it cost me $22 just because I want to build in a margin. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but in that sources and uses, I did not put a contingency item line in there. And that's a mistake. You need to have a contingency of some amount, maybe, 2, 3, 4, 5%, somewhere in there, if you can make it work, because there's always things that come up. But that's a difficulty. You don't really know what your whole project's going to be, but you start to work with your lenders and pair your lenders for what the potential is going to be, and then hopefully you get it right. If you fall under, then you're going to have to delay things a little bit and find some more funding.
Okay, Earl Phillip has asked, have you started to add any renewables such as solar to your development or energy efficiency upgrades?
When you're dealing with the site development, there's not a lot that you can put in, but I would say in energy efficiency, and I know Bill Lazar, I don't know if he's still on this call, but he is a Florida certified green builder. In a development, one thing that you can do is face your homes in a certain direction, depending on the development. If all the fronts of the homes have a southern exposure or a northern exposure, with a southern exposure, they're going to get more heat gain in the winter and things like that. Of course, they're going to be really hot in the summertime, but that's one thing you have to do. You can look for landscaping that doesn't take a lot of irrigation and so forth. Maybe use more gravel irrigation or landscape than do xeriscaping. So you have some control from that point. But as for the construction of the dwellings themselves, you're going to have to run power lines in, and you're going to assume, unless you're building an off-the-grid community, you're going to build, probably a 250, 200 amp service to each home to make sure they get proper electricity. And then what happens with the contractors as homes are built from there, that remains to be a differing question on what you can do for energy efficiency. But the site development, just by the direction in which you aim your homes and develop your subdivision, can have an impact on energy consumption.
Okay, so with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and watch for the survey that should be coming your direction, as well as this information will also be on HAC's website. Give us about this afternoon or tomorrow to get that information there. I'd also like to thank Earl, because he has such a vast knowledge of this topic and he does a super job. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks on May 25th.
Thank you all.